The day my boss asked me for money was the same day I found out my lease renewal was going up by $300 0 cents a month. I remember staring at my email, doing quick mental math, wondering if I could still afford my car payment and the therapy sessions I had finally started scheduling again. I was already planning on cutting back where I could. Less takeout, maybe cancel that gym membership I never used. So when Mark called me into his office with that look on his face like someone had died, the last thing I expected was a personal favor. He started with the story about his kids, how they'd been crying themselves to sleep because their mother was talking about moving out, how the house felt cold, how he couldn't focus on work anymore, how everything was crumbling. And then finally he said, "It's Stephanie, I know this is insane and completely out of line, but I don't know who else to turn to. I need a loan. Just a short-term thing. 20 grand. I'll pay you back within 3 months, I promise." Mark was my manager, but more than that, he was someone I trusted. He had mentored me when I joined the firm 4 years ago, fresh out of grad school and full of imposter syndrome. He was the one who defended me when I challenged a senior client on a technical call and got pushback. He was the one who told me I had leadership material when I didn't even believe I had speaking up in meetings material. So yeah, I admired him, respected him, maybe even had a soft spot for him I wasn't proud of. I didn't say yes right away. I told him I'd think about it. I went home that night and barely slept. I paced around my apartment, ran the numbers on my savings account, and opened up the spreadsheet where I kept track of my emergency fund. I was supposed to use that money for a down payment on a house in the next 2 years. That was my dream. Something modest, a starter place outside of the city. Nothing fancy, but mine. $20,000 would leave me with just enough to keep the dream alive, barely. Still, the image of Mark's face kept replaying in my head. The way his voice cracked when he said his wife was going to take the kids to Denver. The way he said, "I just need time to prove to her I'm still the man she married." And maybe I wanted to believe him. Maybe I wanted to believe that good men still existed, that if someone was brave enough to ask for help, someone else should be brave enough to give it. So I said yes. The next morning, I transferred the money from my savings account to his. I remember he held the confirmation page in his hands like it was a sacred document. He didn't look smug or entitled, he looked broken. That, more than anything, made me feel like I'd done the right thing. "You won't regret this," he said. "You're helping me save my family." I told him I trusted him, and at the time, I meant it. What I didn't know then was that this wouldn't be a story about trust. It would be a story about betrayal. But it would take a Tesla and an Instagram post to show me that. It started with a car, or more precisely, the car. A shiny, brand new Tesla Model Y parked in the executive section of our building's underground garage. At first, I didn't think much of it. Our company had several senior-level staff who could easily afford something like that. I assumed it belonged to the new VP of product, a guy who liked to name-drop venture capital firms and had once described his wife as his brand manager. But then I saw her, Amber. Technically, she was part of the marketing team, though from what I could tell, her primary skill was leaning on things in photos and finding reasons to miss meetings. I saw her get out of the Tesla, laughing into her phone, wearing sunglasses indoors and holding a cold brew, with her name spelled Ombre. It was almost cinematic how confidently she stepped out of that car like it belonged to her. I stared for a moment longer than I should have, long enough for her to glance in my direction, smile with that vacant influencer-style smugness, and strut away. Something inside me shifted. My stomach didn't drop. My breath didn't hitch. Not yet. I was still in denial. I told myself it's probably a lease from her parents, or maybe she's dating some rich guy, because the one thing I refused to believe at that moment was that it had anything to do with Mark. I couldn't allow my brain to go there, not yet. That changed a few hours later when I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break. I wasn't even following her, but the algorithm, blessed its cruel efficiency, decided to show me one of her stories. I clicked on it mindlessly, expecting some promo code for skincare or a gym selfie. Instead, there it was, a slow pan of the Tesla's interior, ambient music in the background with the caption "Spoiled and proud, blessed new baby." Then another story, this one a boomerang of her holding up a set of keys with a red keychain that read Model Y. And then the final hit. Her in the driver's seat, wearing an off-shoulder top and way too big sunglasses, kissing someone on the cheek with a little heart emoji over his face. But I knew that profile, that jawline, that shirt. I had seen it just yesterday in the office. It was Mark, my boss, the man who told me his marriage was crumbling, who cried in my office about his children, who took $20,000 from my savings with shaking hands and a voice full of desperation. And there he was, pressed up against Amber's overdrawn lips, smiling like a teenager, gifting her a Tesla with what I now realized was my money. I didn't move. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't even blink. The air felt thick, like I just stepped into a steam room. I replayed the story again and again, hoping, praying that I was mistaken, but every replay confirmed what I already knew. It was him. There was no doubt. Suddenly, the office around me felt hostile. The fluorescent lights buzzed louder, the clicks of keyboards were intrusive. I could hear a team member laughing in the break room, and the sound felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I left the office early that day. I told my team I had a migraine. That wasn't a lie. My head was pounding. I couldn't think straight. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to breathe normally. I kept going over every moment of that loan, every word he said to me, every expression on his face, every detail in his story. It was like watching a movie I'd already seen, only now with the director's commentary explaining what was really going on. I just need to show her I'm committed to the family, he'd said. This is the lowest I've ever been, he'd whispered. You're helping me be a better man, he'd claimed. Lies, all of it. And the worst part? I had believed him. Not because I was stupid, but because I wanted to believe in something good, in someone good. Later that night, I got a text from him, just checking in, hope you're okay, let's catch up soon. I stared at the screen, my fingers twitching with the urge to respond, to explode, to say everything I was thinking in one long, unfiltered rant. But I didn't. Instead, I screenshot it and saved it to a folder I labeled Receipts. Then I went back to Amber's profile, which had now gone private. Someone had probably tipped her off. But it didn't matter. I already had what I needed, the Tesla stories, the photos, the proof. And proof, I was quickly realizing, was power. The next few days at work were surreal. Mark acted like nothing had happened, like we hadn't crossed the line from professional to personal in the worst possible way. He smiled during meetings, asked about my weekend, gave me feedback on a presentation, as if he weren't a walking betrayal wrapped in a designer suit. I played along, I nodded, I smiled, I laughed at his jokes. But inside, I was already laying the foundation for what I knew had to happen next. I wasn't just angry, I was insulted. He hadn't even tried to cover his tracks. That was the part that really stuck with me. He thought I was too naive, too soft-spoken, too nice to ever challenge him. He thought I'd cry into my pillow and disappear. He didn't know me at all. Every time I saw him after that, every fake smile, every casual "how's your day going" made it easier to detach. I started documenting everything, emails, texts, Slack messages. I checked company expense reports for the vehicle reimbursement policy. I talked to someone in finance under the guise of helping with budget planning and found out the Tesla had been registered under a corporate expense code labeled Executive Outreach. I wrote that down, I copied it, I took screenshots, I kept quiet, but every smile I returned to him was one step closer to war. Because if Mark thought the worst thing he'd done was spend my money on his mistress, he had no idea what was coming next. It didn't take long for Mark to shift his tone. Just a week after Amber's Instagram went private and the office gossip started picking up speed, he called me into his office. His voice had changed, less friendly, more guarded. He closed the door behind me and leaned against his desk like he always did when he was trying to seem casual. "Listen," he said, "I've noticed you've been a little distant lately. Everything okay?" I looked at him and felt nothing. No more confusion, no more sadness. Just a steady, simmering coldness that I had carefully cultivated over the past several days. "Just busy," I replied with a polite smile. "Tons of client work." He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing, trying to read my face. "You sure? 'Cause it seems like there's something off." I met his gaze, holding it long enough to make him slightly uncomfortable. Maybe I'm just realizing I need to set better boundaries, especially at work. I let the sentence hang there like smoke. He laughed, forced and shallow. "Boundaries are good. I respect that." The next day, I was removed from the strategic planning group I had been leading for over a year. No explanation, no warning, just a calendar update that excluded me. When I asked him about it, Mark said it was to redistribute workloads and that the leadership team needed to stay agile. The corporate BS was so thick I almost laughed. But instead I nodded and added another note to my file. Within a few days, I noticed more signs. Emails I was no longer CC'd on, clients I had built long-term relationships with being transitioned to other team members, mostly men. My performance review, which had always been top tier, was suddenly being delayed. And then came the final insult. A closed-door meeting with HR where I was told that my role was being reevaluated as part of an internal restructuring. They said the word redundant without saying it, and when I asked if this had anything to do with my recent contributions or behavior, they smiled tightly and said it was purely strategic. I walked out of that meeting in a daze, but only for a moment, because deep down I had already expected this. It was retaliation, plain and simple. Mark was trying to make me disappear before I could make too much noise. He was hoping to phase me out quietly, professionally, so that when I was finally gone, no one would ask questions. Just another team change. But what he didn't know was that I had already prepared for this. I had spent the past 2 weeks backing up every email, every calendar change, every Slack conversation where he'd asked for the loan and implied his personal crisis. I had the text messages, I had screenshots of Amber's Instagram before she locked it down. I even had a copy of the Tesla's lease agreement that I'd obtained through a contact in the finance department who owed me a favor. That's when I realized I wasn't just documenting, I was building a case. And I wasn't the only one. After being iced out of my teams, I started reaching out to a few colleagues discreetly. One of them, a project manager named Leah, confided that she had been pressured by Mark to keep quiet about some budget inconsistencies in Amber's marketing projects. Another woman from HR who had resigned 2 months ago told me in confidence that she had flagged a conflict of interest in the executive expense reports, specifically involving Amber, but her concerns had been dismissed. The pattern was becoming obvious. Mark was using company funds to fund his affair. Worse, he was creating a toxic environment for anyone who dared to question him. That's when the anger turned into something sharper, clarity. I wasn't just going to leave quietly. I wasn't going to walk away and let him keep pretending he was a respected leader while I was labeled difficult or disruptive. I didn't care about revenge in the petty sense. I didn't want to ruin his life for sport, but I wanted justice. I wanted him to feel the fear he had tried to plant in me. I wanted him to realize that you can't manipulate, exploit, and discard people like tools and expect to walk away unscathed. So I booked a consultation with a labor attorney. She reviewed everything, my documentation, the timing of the restructuring, the misuse of corporate funds, the text messages asking for the personal loan. She didn't just nod. She leaned forward with interest. "You've got something here," she said, "especially if you're willing to make this public inside the company. They'll want to settle fast." She explained that what Mark had done wasn't just unethical. It bordered on financial misconduct, using company funds to purchase a vehicle registered under a fake marketing initiative, tied to a romantic partner with no deliverables. Those were major red flags, and if my loan could be connected to coercion, there was potential for a civil suit as well. I didn't respond right away. I needed to think. Not because I was afraid, I had already moved past fear, but because I wanted to be strategic. I wasn't going to lash out and burn the building down. I was going to open the doors, let the smoke billow out, and let everyone see who had been playing with fire. The next Monday, I sent a confidential email to our company's legal department. I outlined the situation, attached a summary of documents, and requested a formal meeting. Within 48 hours, I was sitting in a sleek glass conference room with a senior compliance officer and 2 attorneys going over the timeline. They didn't interrupt. They took notes. They asked clarifying questions. One of them looked visibly uncomfortable when I showed the screenshots from Amber's story. Another raised his eyebrows when I revealed the payment confirmation on the Tesla lease, tagged under executive outreach. I handed them a printed packet titled Documentation of Ethical Violations, Mark Whitman. They thanked me for coming forward. They said they'd review it thoroughly, but I saw the way they looked at each other as they gathered the files. They knew this wasn't going to be brushed aside. Not this time. And just like that, the game shifted. I wasn't the one being watched anymore. I wasn't in the room when Mark found out about the investigation, but I heard about it within the hour. Apparently, he had just walked out of a client strategy meeting, all smug smiles and that faux friendly charm he loved to weaponize. Then he was pulled aside by two members of the legal team and escorted, politely but firmly, into a conference room. The door stayed closed for nearly 2 hours. When he finally emerged, he didn't look like the same man. His hair was slightly mussed, and his usual smug expression had been replaced by something I hadn't seen on his face before: panic. Not stress, not frustration, actual, unmistakable panic. I kept my head down and my expression neutral. I wasn't stupid. I knew that if I looked too satisfied, too victorious, it could undermine everything. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to survive, to prove, and eventually, to rebuild. But inside, my nerves were vibrating with electricity, the kind of electricity that comes when a storm is finally breaking open after days of choking humidity. I wanted to scream. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell every single person in that office exactly what this man had done to me. But I didn't. Not yet. The company's internal communications team issued a vague statement later that afternoon. As part of our ongoing commitment to ethical practices and financial transparency, an internal review is being conducted regarding certain executive expenditures and managerial decisions. During this process, leadership will be restructured temporarily. It didn't mention names, but everyone knew. The whispers spread like wildfire. People started trading theories in Slack messages and hallway whispers. The Tesla came up a lot, so did Amber, and somewhere in the mess, my name started floating to the surface too. Not in accusation, but in association. There were rumors I had gone to legal, that I had receipts, that I had been betrayed and was fighting back. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just did my job, kept my head down, and waited. Mark was put on leave the next day. Administrative leave, they called it, with pay pending the investigation, but I knew what that meant. It was a corporate pause, a holding pattern while the company figured out how to clean up the mess without tanking its reputation. Amber's name disappeared from the directory entirely. No explanation, no goodbye email, no LinkedIn update. One day she was there, and the next, gone. Her desk was cleared out after hours. A few of her designer items were left behind. An overpriced water bottle, a lip gloss, a notebook filled with what looked like fake strategy ideas in messy handwriting. It was almost poetic. She'd shown up with nothing and left with nothing, except, of course, for a very expensive lesson. As for me, things didn't immediately get easier. People looked at me differently now, not with pity, thankfully, but with caution, like they were trying to figure out what I was capable of. Some admired it. I saw it in the subtle nods in meetings, the way one of the senior analysts started including me in strategy sessions again. But others, especially the old guard who had aligned with Mark, kept their distance. It didn't matter. I hadn't done any of this for their approval. I'd done it for myself, for the truth. For every moment I sat at my kitchen table wondering how I'd been stupid enough to trust someone who saw me as disposable. I received an email from corporate HR asking me to join a meeting with the executive board. No subject line, no agenda, just a polite but formal invitation. I spent the night before preparing, not rehearsing a speech. I didn't need to. I knew the story better than anyone, but I organized my documents, printed fresh copies of everything I'd submitted, and reviewed my timeline. I dressed with precision the next morning, navy blazer, black slacks, clean lines, minimal jewelry. No softness, no ambiguity. When I walked into that boardroom, I wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with, not a woman scorned, but a professional who had been used, lied to, and had the strength to burn the rope instead of hanging from it. The room was colder than I expected, both literally and figuratively. The blinds were shut, the AC humming loudly, the board members seated with carefully measured expressions. The general counsel, a woman named Janine, nodded at me as I sat down. "Thank you for coming in," she said. "We wanted to speak with you directly now that we've completed the preliminary phase of the review." I nodded once, keeping my face calm. They began asking questions, not hostile, but thorough. When did I first notice inconsistencies in the expense reports? Did I feel pressured into loaning Mark the money? Had he ever implied that my employment depended on silence or loyalty? I answered everything clearly and directly. No exaggerations, no emotion, just the truth. At the end, the CFO looked at me and folded his hands. "We want to acknowledge that what happened here was unacceptable. We're taking steps to ensure nothing like this happens again. But more than that, we want to thank you. You could have walked away. You didn't. You held us accountable. There was a beat of silence, and then he continued. We'd like to offer you a promotion, Director of Strategy and Client Retention. You've demonstrated sound judgment and an ability to lead under pressure. We think you're the right person to rebuild trust, both internally and with our key partners. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just nodded. Thank you, I said. I accept. Walking out of that boardroom, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, clear, like the weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been acknowledged, not just by me, but by the people who had the power to make it matter. The truth was finally loud enough that it couldn't be ignored. That night, I opened the letter Mark had written me after being placed on leave. I had found it in my work mailbox with my name written in his signature block print. It was short. No apology, no ownership. Just a line that read, I hope one day you understand the pressure I was under. I folded the letter once and dropped it into the shredder. Pressure breaks people, but sometimes it reveals exactly who they are, and sometimes, if you're strong enough to hold your ground while everything crumbles around you, you come out the other side not broken, but unshakable. You'd think that after exposing your boss for misusing company funds, getting him suspended, and being offered a promotion by the executive board, the story would end. That's what I thought too, naively. But people like Mark don't just go down quietly. When someone's built their identity around power and you take it from them, you don't just destroy their position. You unravel their entire illusion of control. And that's when they get dangerous. I'd only been in my new role as Director of Strategy and Client Retention for a few days when I got the first message, an anonymous email sent to my personal Gmail, not even my company address. The subject line was, "You think you've won?" Inside was a single sentence, "Enjoy it while it lasts." There was no signature, no return address, and the account had already been deactivated when I tried to trace it. I didn't panic. I wasn't new to veiled threats or intimidation tactics, but the timing was telling, too perfect to be coincidence. And the tone, it wasn't a bluff. It was the first ripple in what I knew would become a storm. I reported it to the company's internal security team, and they flagged it but couldn't trace it back to anyone definitively. Still, we all knew. No one said his name, but his shadow hung over every meeting I attended. A week later, I started noticing odd things at work. Files I had organized were missing minor details. Notes I clearly remembered typing weren't there. Drafts were altered slightly. It was subtle enough that it could be blamed on technical issues or human error, but frequent enough to feel deliberate. My access permissions changed without explanation, forcing me to go through extra layers just to get into documents I'd created myself. It wasn't sabotage. It was psychological warfare, and I knew exactly who was behind it. Mark may have been suspended, but he still had friends inside. People who didn't care what he had done. People who still thought loyalty meant silence. Then came the meeting, a quarterly client review with one of our largest accounts, a contract I had managed since its infancy, built from scratch through late nights, weekend emails, and genuine relationship building. When I logged into the video call, I was greeted with awkward smiles and an uncomfortable silence. One of the partners, a man I had worked with for 3 years, cleared his throat and said, "We just want to be transparent. We've received some documentation that's raised concerns." He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "About your involvement in the executive fund allocations. Your name was included in an anonymous packet sent to our legal team. It suggests you were complicit in misappropriating client funds." I froze. For a second, I couldn't breathe. It felt like all the oxygen had been vacuumed out of the room. I kept my composure and asked to see the documentation. They said they'd forward it to me after the call. I made it through the rest of the meeting like a robot, nodding at the right moment, speaking in clipped, efficient sentences. When the call ended, I stared at my screen for a full minute before pushing my laptop aside and walking to the window. Outside, the city was humming with normal life. People walking their dogs, cars honking in distant traffic, the rhythm of a world that had no idea someone had just tried to burn mine down. When the email came in, I opened it immediately. The documents were carefully constructed, obviously edited to frame me. They included screenshots of budget approvals I hadn't signed, doctored emails implying I had greenlit Tesla's expenses, and fake Slack messages where I supposedly joked about getting my cut. It was clumsy, clearly a forgery to anyone who knew how internal approvals worked, but to an outsider, it looked damning. I forwarded everything to legal and met with them the next morning. They were calm, thorough, and direct. "This is retaliation," Janine, the general counsel, said. "You rattled someone who thought they were untouchable. Now they're trying to smear you to save their own skin." She told me not to respond publicly. "Let us handle it. We're going to trace this. In the meantime, document everything. Don't engage with anyone you suspect might be connected." So, I waited and watched, and while legal dug into metadata and internal logs, I started my own parallel investigation. Not to uncover who did it, I already knew that, but to find out just how far he was willing to go. I reached out to an old contact in corporate communications who now worked for a private intelligence firm. I asked him if he could look into anything recent tied to Mark, new job offers, PR moves, even freelance consulting work. He came back with a goldmine. Mark had been quietly reaching out to several competitors, pitching himself as a consultant who had been forced out by internal politics. He was offering insider knowledge under the table and presenting himself as the real victim of a vengeful ex-employee. I wasn't surprised, but I was disgusted. And then something strange happened. Mark called me. Not a text, not an email, an actual phone call. I let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice was calm, falsely casual. "Stephanie," he said, "we need to talk." I didn't say anything. "Look," he continued, "I know things got complicated, but this doesn't have to get uglier than it already is." He said he was willing to walk away quietly, that he didn't want to drag anyone through the mud, especially someone he used to respect. I felt my fingers curl into a fist around my phone. "You're threatening me," I said. He laughed. No, just offering a solution, a way out, for both of us." I hung up. 2 days later, legal confirmed the packet had been traced to a burner account linked to a Wi-Fi connection registered to Mark's home address. The evidence was now irrefutable. The forged documents, the planted messages, the false narrative he had tried to circulate, they had it all. HR launched an official termination process. The company drafted a formal public statement clearing my name and affirming its zero-tolerance policy for and, most importantly, the executive board voted to pursue legal action against Mark for breach of fiduciary duty, defamation, and attempted interference with corporate assets. When I got the final email, the one stating that his contract had been officially terminated and that he would no longer be allowed on company property, I didn't smile. I exhaled. Long and slow, not out of relief, but out of exhaustion, because this wasn't just about winning. It was about surviving a war I hadn't asked to fight, a war I never should have had to fight, and yet I had. I had stood my ground. I had kept my records. I had trusted my instincts, and I had walked through fire without letting it burn me to ash. I took the printed email and placed it in my drawer, right next to the original loan confirmation from months ago. The one where he promised to pay me back in 3 months. I looked at that number, $20,000, 0 cents, and thought about everything it had cost me. And then I thought about everything it had earned me: power, clarity, and the unshakable knowledge that I would never, ever be someone else's silence again. The fallout didn't end with Mark's termination. If anything, it was just the beginning. As the dust settled inside the company, what remained was a shattered illusion, the image of a charismatic, respected executive replaced by the undeniable truth of a manipulative man who had used his power to exploit, deceive, and intimidate. The investigation had made waves far beyond the confines of our office walls. Vendors started asking questions, clients reached out to confirm rumors. Even the press caught wind of something brewing, though the company refused to go public beyond a carefully worded statement. After a comprehensive internal investigation, we have concluded an employment relationship due to a violation of company policy and professional ethics. It was corporate speak, but people weren't stupid. The whispers got louder. Mark's name became radioactive in our industry, almost overnight. And yet, for all that had happened, I still hadn't received a single word of apology. Not for the money he took, not for the lies, not for trying to ruin my career just because I refused to stay quiet. And that silence, it was the most revealing part of all. He hadn't just underestimated me, he'd never really seen me at all. I had been a convenience, a tool, something to manipulate until it broke. And when it didn't break, he tried to destroy it. But I hadn't just survived, I had evolved. The promotion I had been given wasn't just a title, it came with a new seat at the table, new access, new reach. I was now in the room where high-level decisions were made, where budgets were drawn, partners were evaluated, and leadership was shaped. And the more I saw, the more I realized how deep the rot had gone. Mark wasn't the only one who'd been quietly exploiting loopholes or protecting their own interests under the guise of loyalty to the company. There were others, less obvious, more discreet, but just as complicit. The difference was they were smart enough to stay quiet when he fell, to back away, clean their hands, and pretend they'd never been part of the game. But I had kept the receipts. Not just on Mark, on everyone. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. If we were going to rebuild a healthier culture, one that valued integrity over charisma, then the cleanup had to be thorough. Over the next several weeks, I worked with compliance to revise several key processes, particularly around expense approvals and vendor relationships. We implemented new transparency protocols, anonymous reporting mechanisms, cross-check systems that would make it harder for anyone to abuse power unnoticed. And I did all of it with precision and control, never reactive, never emotional. That part of me, the part that once second-guessed everything, was gone. But still, one thing remained unresolved: the money. The original $20,000. It wasn't about the amount anymore, not really. I'd recovered in other ways. My salary had increased, I'd gained bonuses, equity, influence. Financially, I was better off than ever before. But the principle of it, that mattered. I had loaned that money in good faith, based on a lie. And while everything else had been dealt with, that piece still lingered like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. That's when my attorney reached out. She'd been quietly pursuing options behind the scenes, keeping tabs on Mark's movements post-termination. He'd tried to sue the company for wrongful dismissal but was quickly shut down. He'd then filed a motion to block any personal claims from former employees, including me. That motion was denied. He'd also attempted to apply for several roles at other firms but was ghosted after reference checks. One company had even contacted our legal department to verify that his departure had indeed involved ethical violations. The answer had been firm and immediate. "We can pursue civil action," my attorney said. "Based on the documentation and the nature of the loan, we have a strong claim, especially since you have written confirmation that he accepted the money and intended to repay it within a specific time frame." I hesitated for a moment, not because I wasn't sure, but because I knew what it would mean. Another battle, another wave of headlines, another reminder of how far someone was willing to go to silence the woman they underestimated. But then I remembered the look on his face when he realized he had lost. The look that said, "How dare you fight back?" And I knew I wasn't done. We filed the lawsuit 2 weeks later. Breach of verbal contract, fraudulent misrepresentation, emotional distress. Nothing exaggerated, nothing vindictive, just the facts, just the truth. When Mark was served, I heard about it through a colleague who had once been his friend. Apparently, he looked shocked, like he had genuinely believed I'd let it go, that I'd move on and be grateful just to have survived. He never responded directly, but his legal team did, quickly and aggressively. They filed a counterclaim, trying to accuse me of workplace harassment, of using my influence to manufacture false evidence against him. They attached altered screenshots, vague timelines, statements from anonymous sources. It was laughable, transparent, but it also showed his hand. He wasn't defending himself, he was flailing. During discovery, we subpoenaed his bank records. That's when we learned that the Tesla had been paid off in full. No lease, no loan, just a wire transfer for the entire amount. My attorney flagged the transaction. It matched the date of the loan he received from me. The timing was undeniable. His claim that the money was for family reconciliation efforts collapsed instantly. He had never even attempted to repay a dime. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes and little patience for theatrics, called his behavior a textbook example of workplace manipulation and personal exploitation. Her ruling was swift. He was ordered to repay the loan in full with interest, plus cover all legal fees. The day the judgment was finalized, I received a payment notification, a direct deposit, $24,360.00. The original $20,000, plus interest. No note, no apology, just a transaction. Silent, cold, empty. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed the money, but because it represented something bigger, a full circle, a line drawn under everything he tried to take from me. Dignity, stability, identity. I donated a portion of it to a local nonprofit that supported women recovering from workplace harassment. The rest I used for something small and symbolic. I booked a solo weekend trip to Sedona, a quiet cabin, no signal, just space to breathe, to remember who I was before all of this, and to acknowledge who I had become. Stronger, smarter, sharper. The war was over, but the woman who emerged from it, she wasn't going anywhere. 6 months after the judgment, I no longer flinched when someone mentioned Mark's name. He had become a cautionary tale, an unspoken example of what happened when arrogance met accountability. Inside the company, we moved on. Culture shifted, slowly but perceptibly. I watched junior employees speak up more confidently in meetings, watched old structures quietly dismantled, watched women who used to tiptoe now stand taller. My title stayed the same, but everything else had evolved. My influence grew not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it, quietly, relentlessly, not through performance, but through presence, through endurance. People sometimes ask me if I regret lending him that money. It's a fair question, and for a long time, I didn't have an answer I liked. For weeks, I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment leading up to that decision. The expression on his face, the crack in his voice, the illusion of vulnerability so carefully designed to disguise manipulation. I would remember how I convinced myself that kindness was strength, that generosity meant I was a good person. And for a while, I hated that version of myself. The trusting one, the empathetic one, the woman who believed him. But over time, something shifted. I stopped seeing her as foolish. I started seeing her as brave. She took a risk. She wanted to believe someone could be better. That hope wasn't a weakness. It was the seed of everything I had become. The truth is, if I hadn't said yes that day, I might never have seen him for who he really was. I might never have uncovered the lies, never been forced to fight, never discovered what I was truly capable of. That money wasn't a loss, it was a revelation. An expensive education, yes, but one that paid dividends far beyond the courtroom. I learned how to stand up for myself when no one else would. I learned that revenge isn't always loud, it can be methodical, strategic, precise. I learned that justice doesn't always look like victory. Sometimes it looks like silence, like dignity, like walking past someone who tried to ruin you and feeling absolutely nothing. I never spoke to Mark again. There were rumors he moved out of state, tried to restart his career under a different title, lower down the ladder. I imagine he still tells himself a version of the story where he's the victim, where I was unreasonable, emotional, dangerous. Let him. I don't need him to know the truth. I know it. That's enough. One day, I found the original paper check stub in an old folder, the check I wrote for $20,000, dated and signed in a moment of misguided trust. I stared at it for a few seconds, then shredded it without ceremony. That piece of paper didn't define me anymore. It never did. What defines me now are the things I built after. The team I lead, the mentorship I offer, the systems I change, the standards I raised, the quiet moments when someone knocks on my door and says, "Can I ask your advice?" That's the legacy I care about, not the one someone tried to erase, but the one I created from the ashes, the one that belongs only to me. On the anniversary of the lawsuit being filed, I treated myself to dinner alone, a glass of wine, a view of the city skyline. No drama, no headlines, just peace. As I paid the check, the waiter handed me my receipt and said, "You look like someone who knows exactly what she's doing." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, I agreed.